Why do so many SIBO protocols not work? And I say this because I have had patients that come to me that say they have SIBO. They have SIBO positive tests. They have been on protocols. They try things. They say maybe they get better for a little while, but then it just comes back, or it doesn't work at all. I know that a lot of practitioners are like, they want the chalice, the holy grail of the SIBO protocols in order to fix SIBO, because they know that what they're using isn't working, and SIBO is a really difficult thing to treat. Maybe. Why are they not all working? Maybe it's not SIBO. Okay. I said this, alluded to this in a second ago, but our patient and client success, when you think about this, is predicated on the treatments, interventions, and protocols that we give them, which is predicated on interpretation of certain assessments. Now, if this assessment is wrong, then your interpretation of it is going to be wrong, because if it's false positives or false negatives, we're interpreting it wrong. We can also misinterpret a good assessment, but in this case we're going to talk about bad assessments. Then your treatment and interventions are going to not work, and guess what? You don't have patient and client success, which all of us know too well today. So why then is SIBO so prevalent today? And when you think about it, SIBO didn't exist 10 years ago. It did. People were talking about it in research, but man, it, like a lot of things in this industry, has just taken over. Everybody's talking about SIBO. Everybody has SIBO. There's SIBO conferences and webinars and protocols and all these different things. Why all of a sudden? And not to be funny, I'm being very serious about this. When you really think about why it's prevalent, there's a few possibilities. Number one, increased prevalence. Maybe people's guts are unhealthy now, more than ever before. Entirely possible. Maybe SIBO wasn't a thing before. Maybe people had adequate hydrochloric acid and bile and all these things, weren't stressed out, whatever, and they had normal and healthy guts. So maybe people's guts are less healthy today. That's entirely possible. Maybe there's increased awareness. Now, if all of a sudden people start talking about this thing that is describing certain symptoms that have existed for a while, then maybe with that increased awareness comes an increased prevalence of it, because people know what to look for. It's like if you didn't know about termites and all of a sudden did, and then all of a sudden you realize that everybody has termites in their house. It could also be, and this relates to the previous one, that it's increased testing. Well, if you have a very inexpensive consumer-related test that anybody can run, well, of course, then you might see more SIBO, right? And this relates to the other one. Increased awareness can lead to more testing, or better testing, or more accessible testing, and the testing then, if it's done more often, can lead to more awareness. Or maybe it's something else entirely, and I'm going to go ahead and show you that maybe it's too many false positives in testing today. Which, when you look at it, more awareness about a thing which has happened will likely lead to more testing. SIBO's a thing, let me test for that. But if the testing is flawed, and that leads to false positives, then more people are going to have SIBO. They're going to tell their friends, hey, I have SIBO. Practitioners are going to say, man, all my patients have SIBO, which is going to lead to more testing. And if it's an inaccurate test, that's problematic. This is a rhetorical question. I'm not going to answer this for you. I'd be curious to see what you think the ramifications are. But what are the ramifications of this for the patients, for the practitioners, for protocols, for antibiotic use, for natural antibiotic use, antimicrobials? For people having a diagnosis and then owning it, that's their story. I have SIBO, okay, and I can't get rid of it. So I'm going to start with one paper, then we're going to talk a little bit about what SIBO is, because you may not know what it is, and maybe you're totally unfamiliar with the breath testing that goes along with SIBO. So we're just going to talk about, show you this paper, then we're going to talk about a little bit about SIBO and the premise of testing, and then we're going to look at what the literature says about all of this, as well as some solutions at the very end. So, small intestine bacterial overgrowth syndrome, a guide for the appropriate use of breath testing, published in October 2020. What did these researchers say? The lactulose breath test, we're going to talk a lot about this, you guys, is based upon an incorrect premise. That's not good. And therefore incorrect interpretations, which has resulted in the overdiagnosis of SIBO and the excessive use of antibiotics in clinical practice. Well, that doesn't sound very good. I wonder if they say anything else that's noteworthy. The lactulose breath test should be discarded from future use, and the literature, this is the scientific research, what they're saying is, based upon the lactulose breath test, should be discounted accordingly. What do they say here? Nobody should be using the lactulose breath test for SIBO. And if that weren't enough, any research papers that use the lactulose breath test in their research, you shouldn't even read it. It's a waste of a research paper. It's not even worth reading. That's pretty huge, don't you think? We're just getting warmed up. So what is SIBO? So there's a picture of a healthy intestinal tract, I guess. A little bit of bacteria in the small intestines. The light green, there's a little bit more bacteria in the large intestine, of course. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And I just realized that bowel looks like it's about to poop right on my head. And that was, and I don't really put a lot of thought into these things. Oh well. Okay, go ahead and screenshot that and post that somewhere on social media, why don't you? Dr. Ball's about to be pooped on his head. So what is SIBO? SIBO by itself, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, is abnormal proliferation of bacteria in the lumen of the small intestines. Okay, this is pretty basic stuff, but in case you didn't know it, I want to go over it. You notice what happened there. It turned into red, inflamed with more bacteria in the small intestines. Presence of bacteria influences the metabolism of the small intestine. Here's what happens. Basically, more bacteria in the small intestine that should be there leads to a metabolism of the nutrients and the things being eaten, causing absorptive issues, maldigestion, and a whole bunch of other things. And it says that impacts digestion and absorption that can cause, and this is important, vitamin and mineral deficiencies. For example, one that's characterized well in the literature is B12 and megaloblastic anemia, macrocytic anemia, because of B12 deficiencies. But you could be deficient in any micronutrient if there's issues in the small intestines. We'll talk about like the length of the small intestines and some things as well. Fat malabsorption, protein loss leading to potential edema in serious cases, and just global nutritional deficiencies. Why? Because in physiology and anatomy, the small intestine is the place of absorption. Digestion and absorption happens in the small intestine. So if the small intestine is dysfunctional, you don't digest, you don't absorb, things can ferment, things causing gas and bloating. You don't absorb the things that you need to, like fats, proteins, even carbohydrates in significant cases, as well as micronutrients. So what needs to be characterized, however, is what is SIBO, just simply small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and what is SIBO syndrome. If we're going to be practitioners, you know the